From LA to Piscataway, you've come to the right place to talk all things Big Ten. Welcome to Big Ten Ted Live.
Happy Tuesday night, everybody, and welcome to Big Ten Ted Live. Believe it or not, folks, we are just about maybe a quarter of the way through the season. 3 games for a lot of teams in the books, getting ready for week number 4 of action, and things are heating up. Things are heating up in our beloved Big Ten, and things are heating up here on this channel. Things are heating up here on Big Ten Ted Live. We've got a loaded show. We've got a loaded show for everybody tonight. We're going to cover a lot of stuff. We're going to be covering Michigan State, what's going on. It sounds like Michigan State's intent that they are going to dismiss, that they are going to fire Mel Tucker. I'm going to be talking about that in kind of my first segment of the show, and I'm pretty excited about this. Coming up around 8:30 here tonight, I'm going to be talking to the co-host of the Eyes on Big podcast, Jeffery the Greek. For my money, it's the best in the game when it comes to Big Ten podcast out there. So we're going to be talking a couple of macro Big Ten issues, a couple of macro Big Ten topics here tonight. And then we're going to be breaking down some Week 4 matchups. There's some heavy hitters on the Week 4 schedule here this season. So we're going to be talking about that with Jeffery the Greek. He should be checking in here around 8:30. Okay, so we got that going on here tonight. You can be a member here of this channel of the Big Ten Ted's Champions Club. What does being a member mean? It means when you comment on an uploaded video, I'll always respond to your comment. If you post a live chat on a live stream, I'll always feature and put your comment on the screen. Hit that join button, because the more members that I'm able to have, the more I'm able to invest, and the less I have to work other jobs. I'd much rather do this. I'd much rather do this than run a camera for $50 or $75 at a high school football game. So I'm just going to say that. I'd much rather do this right here. So being a member definitely helps me out there. Also, you can get involved, talk Big Ten football all season long by hopping on the Big Ten Ted Discord server. I will drop the link in the chat right now, just in case you didn't get it at the top there. It's a message board. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's kind of like a message board where I've got forums for every team, all 18 teams. That includes our West Coast friends that are coming in next year, so we can kind of get ready for that. So Discord server out there where you can talk about your team. You can talk Big Ten general, recruiting, transfer, all that stuff. You can talk about that all year long. And that doesn't necessarily have to be on an uploaded video or a live stream. So whenever you want, whatever you want, the Discord server is a great way to do that. Once again, we're going to be talking to Jeffery the Greek from the Eyes on Big podcast about some of these Week 4 matchups that are coming up here this week as well. We're going to be talking about Michigan State and what happens with Mel Tucker here in just a little bit as well. I want to say hi to some members and some people coming in, jumping in the chat tonight. Our buddy Big Ten Johnny is here. It's about that time. That it is. Our friend Erica Goldberg in the house here tonight. Good evening, all. Good evening to you, Erica. Casey is in the house. We got a couple of Hawkeyes here back to back. You're going to be excited when Jeffery here comes on. That's going to be talking some Iowa there. So hello to Jared Jones. Got a big game this Saturday. Buckeyes going to South Bend, Indiana to take on the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame as well. Got Minnesota Dave Valensky is in the house here tonight as well. And Lewis Papp, go blue, Michigan and Rutgers. We're going to be talking about that here. I'm not going to say Rutgers is not going to win. All right, let's just get that out of the way. Let's get that out of the way right now. If you saw my preview that dropped earlier today, you know all about that. But Rutgers is a solid football team, folks. Rutgers is a solid football team, and one that, it could be Michigan this week or someone else later down the line. You're going to have to watch out for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. They are looking better as a football program. And I got hurt yet again just thinking about Rutgers and the way they play defense. They hit hard, they hit strong, they tackle strong. Oh man, my body aches every time I watch Rutgers play football. That's how physical of a football team they are over there. All right, let's dive into it. We got the introductions out of the way. Let's talk Michigan State. let's talk Michigan State to kind of start this show off. Let's talk Mel Tucker. So Michigan State University intends to fire Mel Tucker for cause right now. And I'm not going to jump into Tucker. I'm not going to jump into the 4-page document that the university issued here. Was that yesterday, today, whatever day it was? I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about now, and I want to talk about the future for Michigan State. Let's talk about the now. Because they came out in that game against Washington. They looked flat, they looked unmotivated, and they looked uninspired. So, and look, Washington was going to win the game like we just talked about with Michigan and Rutgers. Washington was always going to win that football game. But I did not think it'd be 35-0 at halftime. I didn't think it'd be 42 it could have been 42-0 at halftime. It was embarrassing to watch. I'm going to be honest with you. That was my second screen game. I turned it off. I turned it off sometime in the third quarter. And I'm like, I can't watch this anymore. Washington is a great team. They're a college football playoff contender, folks. But Michigan State, I thought they would come out better. I thought they would at least give at least a little bit of a pushback at times to Washington. I knew Washington was a great team. But this coaching staff has got to get these kids refocused. They got to get these kids dialed in again. Because this week they're going to play Maryland, and we're going to talk about that Maryland-Michigan State game, because there's things to talk about on both sides of the coin. After that, they got to go on the road to Kinnick, I believe, to play Iowa. There's a very good chance that after that stretch they could be 2-3. And I'd have to pull up the schedule. I'd have to take a look at that. I think after that 2-3, I think they might play Michigan at home. So halfway through the season, this could be a 2-4 team, and they could be on a downturn. And that would be a 2-4 record. Ohio State's still on the schedule. Penn State, the last game of the season, is still on the schedule as well. Rutgers, I mentioned them. That's not an easy game. Indiana is on there as well. A team that Michigan State lost to last season that has looked at least a little bit better at times this season. So you got to find a way to focus. You got to find a way to dial these kids in. However you do that, you got to... Here's the thing. You don't have, like that Washington game and then this incoming schedule has happened at the worst time. At the worst time right now. So, because you don't have a Richmond, or you don't have who they play week 1, Central Michigan. Okay, if Mel Tucker things would have happened, and then you would have had Richmond, for example. You would have had a game to kind of get your feet under you as a coaching staff and these players and kind of a little bit of time to adjust. You don't have that. Look at the schedule. This is the Big Ten schedule. And Michigan State coming into this season wasn't a great team. I thought they were a team that maybe was floating around the 500. I think I predicted them to go 6-6, 7-5, something like that in my preseason predictions. Now, with all this turmoil amongst the program, you can tell that there's some distractions in East Lansing, Michigan. I don't think there's any doubt about that. All right, let's move on to the next one because I see some kind of chit-chat going on in the chat. That's what we do in the chat, obviously. What's next? Who's next? Particularly at Michigan State, because we had it last year with Paul Chryst getting fired. We had it with Scott Frost getting fired after that Georgia Southern game. Where do we go? Because that's they're going to be talking about that all season in East Lansing, especially if these next 2 weeks kind of to go downhill. These next few weeks, if they end up losing to someone like to Maryland and Iowa and Michigan, if they end up losing those football games, there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot to kind of break down here. So Mike Elko at Duke, that's one. I saw PJ Fleck floated out in the chat. Maybe I don't know. PJ, there's a lot that comes with PJ. There's a lot that comes with PJ. Let me tell you that much. So there's that as well. I'm going to get to some comments here, and then we'll get into our segment here quickly from Erica. MSU is already a mess. Losing their head coach is the last thing they needed. Gary, a Penn State fan. Ted, any possibility Michigan after Coach Prime? I was hoping this would be a Prime-free zone tonight, but here we are. Thanks for the comment, Gary. I think he's going to stay there until his kids and Travis Hunter have moved on. till their eligibility has expired. That's what I think is going to happen as well. Erica bringing up the PJ Fleck going to Michigan State as well. I don't think so. I think he stays at Oregon. Here's Gerald McKinley chiming in. Jonathan Smith has been kind of thrown out there. I've heard Brian Hartline maybe at Ohio State as well. Dave chiming in saying PJ is not going to Michigan State as well. So that's something that's going to be talked about a lot as the season continues to progress here down the road. Thanks everybody for tuning in here to the live show this evening. With that, let's move on with the show. Let's move on. I am pleased to be welcomed here now. We are going to move on. I'm pleased to be welcomed by the co-host of the Eyes on Big podcast, Jeffery the Greek, joins us now. Jeff, thanks for coming on board here tonight. Greatly appreciate it. This is going to be a great week. It's going to be a great week of games. I am so excited for this week. What is your excitement level kind of coming into this week of some really big Big Ten games?
My excitement level is the same every week. Certainly some weeks, I guess some weeks more than others, but certainly there's some good ones. I know last week people kind of dogged on that, but we got some good games out of last week that people weren't expecting. That's pretty much what you can get at any time with college football. For the Big Ten specific, we're just getting into the conference games, so that's cool. Biggest game probably is, between two teams, or Notre Dame and Ohio State. So that's a non-conference and Big Ten game, obviously, but it'll be a good weekend of football.
I'm excited about this too. Some great primetime action as well. Kind of a lopsided schedule, I guess we can kind of talk about with those two primetime games, and kind of not a lot during the day as well. I wanted to talk about some macro Big Ten topics before we really dive into these week 4 matchups. So SEC not looking great. Georgia had to come back from 11 down to beat South Carolina. Okay, Alabama. They say when you got 2 quarterbacks, you got no quarterbacks. What happens when you have 3, right? Alabama's trying to figure it out. The SEC just is not looking great. At Florida State appears to be the only contender in the ACC, and they squeaked by Boston College this week. The Pac-12 might cannibalize themselves with all the good teams that they have 8 ranked teams this week. Do you think that this is the best chance in recent memory for our beloved Big Ten to bring home a national title with Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, those type of teams?
Yeah, I think so. I will say this. The reason I think that is because I think it's as wide open for anybody. So I don't think it's the Big Ten necessarily completely filling the void that I agree the SEC is leaving. I think it's just that the Big Ten, SEC, Pac-12, ACC, Big 12, I think every conference has about the same chance of getting into the playoff and then having a chance to win 2 games in the playoff, maybe than we've ever seen.
Let's talk about surprises here thus far this season. What players, what teams, units, whatever, what surprise? I'm going to go with mine first, then I'll let you kind of jump off on this. Mine, Nebraska's defense. That's a top 5 unit on the defensive side of the football right now. Tony White has done a tremendous job this season. Then I got Darius Taylor at Minnesota, 4-star running back kind of coming in for the Gophers, who seems to kind of take the stranglehold. A couple of, 100, definitely might have been 150, definitely a back-to-back 100-yard games for Darius Taylor. What have been your surprises so far in the Big Ten season?
Yeah, as far as units, you have a good one there with Nebraska's defense. I knew Nebraska's defense was going to be good and certainly much improved. How good it's looked, didn't expect it to be that drastic of a jump, so that's good. As far as individual player, let's go to Piscataway. The fun guy, Kyle McCord, absolutely has been ripping it up. That's our kind of, joke moniker that we give him, but his game is no joke. He's fun to watch. He has been awesome for Rutgers in general. I think has been a pleasant surprise. And then I think I'm going to say Wisconsin's defense. We'll throw one negative out there. You lose a generational defensive coordinator we felt like on the Eyes on Big podcast, people were just shrugging that off like it was nothing. So I did expect a step back, but I mean, we're talking about a pretty drastic step back for what Badger fans have gotten used to with Jim Leon Hard the last, 5, 6, 7 years into what we've seen. I think that could be something that, causes the Badgers a little bit of issues going down the stretch.
And we'll talk about Wisconsin here a little bit in their matchup against Purdue, because that's kind of one that I threw in there as well. Their offense, you talk about their defense, no question. Even their win against Georgia Southern this last weekend. Yeah, Georgia Southern only got 14 points. They forced a lot of turnovers, of course, in that game. But there were plays I was kind of watching, flipping between that and the Indiana-Louisville game where there was big 20, 30-yard chunk plays early in that first half. So, yeah, it's concerning. Especially this weekend, you got a Purdue team that this one there could be points and yards to be had, but we'll definitely get to that here as the show goes on. All right, let's get to our first game that we're going to break down here today. Let's talk about your Hawkeyes. Iowa traveling to Penn State to take on the Nittany Lions. Playing in a whiteout is hard. Playing against this great Penn State team is hard. And then for Iowa, no Caleb Johnson. No Jazz Patterson. Luke Lachey is out for the season. How does Iowa kind of navigate kind of being shorthanded a little bit this week against Penn State?
Well, they're going to have to do it how they've done it in the past, which is defense and special teams and taking care of the ball on offense. Even if they do all three of those things, still going to be a tall task versus this Penn State team, anywhere, but especially when you're going into Happy Valley in that setting. So, 14-point spread, I get it. I thought it would be a little bit less than that, but I also understand where the 14-point spread is coming from. The biggest loss is Lachey for sure. I mean, that was the number one target for Cade McNamara. And then speaking of Cade McNamara, he's not healthy. I keep saying it on the podcast. People sitting next to me in Kinnick, I'll say it here on our show as well. It is tough to move the ball when your quarterback can't run. I mean, and I'm not saying you necessarily need a runner, a quote unquote dual threat quarterback. You need a guy that can escape, throw the ball with his legs, or just scramble for 4 yards. And that's deficient from Iowa's offense right now. And then on the other side, I feel like people are jumping down Drew Aller's throat. That's a good Illinois defense. Okay. That defense knows how to get after people. So I rewatched that game just this afternoon or evening, actually. And, I didn't see a ton of Drew Aller mistakes. I saw drop balls and I saw good defense from Illinois. The thing is somebody like a team like Illinois or Ohio State or Michigan doesn't dominate Illinois. And people say, what's wrong with Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan? Well, how about Illinois was just playing really good defense on Saturday? Because I think that's what it was. There's nothing quote unquote wrong with Penn State from what I can see. That's a really good team.
Boy, I tell you, because the first 2 weeks you bring up Illinois, the first 2 weeks they were not great defensively against Toledo. Then you follow up. Kansas is Kansas. Okay, that's what I want to say about that game. Kansas is great. They're going to be in the Big 12 hunt, it seems, as the season winds up. But that's the Illinois defense, I think, against Penn State that we expected to see. We saw last year. And Johnny Newton he's one of a kind. And that's kind of where I want to jump off now is Iowa doesn't have maybe one particular talent that's a Johnny Newton. Nobody really has a Johnny Newton. Johnny Newton's first-team All-American, for God's sakes. But there is depth on this Iowa defensive line. You look at Penn State, some people may be raising some questions about where they're at on the O-line. You think Iowa can have some success in the trenches and get in Drew Aller's face?
I don't know. That's a great question. I'm a little concerned as an Iowa fan if they can get pressure on Drew Aller. The sacks have been light for the Hawkeye front seven so far this year. I know some of that is by design. They get the ball. The teams that Iowa's been going against, they've been getting the ball out quick because I think they do have respect for that Iowa D line. With that being said, we've lost some athleticism from last year with, I think, probably the greatest player in the Kirk Ferentz era, or at least the greatest linebacker in the Kirk Ferentz era, leaving. And we've got good linebackers now, but the athleticism on the edges, that's something where I think Penn State can they can get at Iowa's defense a little bit. Certainly the last couple teams have gotten Iowa there. So it'll be interesting to see how Phil Parker can adjust to that. And then on the other side, I think each week the Iowa O-line has been an improvement and a work in progress. There were snippets against a stout Iowa State front seven. Popped last week. I mean, certainly Western Michigan is, not going to be a team that we'll probably see in the postseason. But I do think I've seen enough to say that there is improvement. Huge test now up against this Penn State front seven that I don't think is impossible to run on. Okay, like think Michigan, Penn State the last couple years. Like it's good. I don't want to besmirch, the Penn State front seven, but I think there's possibilities for Iowa to get the running game going at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think I remember Todd Blackledge saying in that first game against Penn State, he was talking about their size in the interior, not the ends. We know Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson are great, but in the interior, he was saying that maybe they're not as big as they should, and he was kind of referencing what you just mentioned with them. So maybe the up-the-middle run game is there with LaShawn Williams in this football game. You talked about Drew Aller, and there's nothing to worry, but I didn't think his performance was too bad. I think he threw for under 50% completion rate. I thought he was gritty. I thought he dug in and made throws when he needed to against Illinois. What do you want to see from Drew? Because when I look at this matchup with the passing the ball down the field, when I look at the wide receivers, KLS, Keandre Lambert-Smith, clear number one. Harrison Wallace is kind of in that number two slot, but he was banged up, didn't play last week. For me, if I'm Iowa, don't you take away KLS and make the other guys beat you? How do you see this matchup when Penn State's putting the ball in the air against this Iowa defense? I think they get Jamari Harris back this week.
Yeah, I think you and I are out on a limb by ourselves with thinking that Aller looked fine last week, because I thought he did as well. Receivers got to catch the ball. A couple times I think he put the ball where only his guy or the sideline was going to catch it, maybe playing safe a little bit. With that being said, what I would always be wondering if I'm a Penn State fan is when are these tight ends going to take off? Because I think they have talented tight ends. I don't see it yet out of the Penn State wide receivers, the separation, the playmaking ability. I like Iowa's secondary and corners. So if I'm Phil Parker, I at least give it a shot at first to see how my cornerbacks do against this receiving core, and you bring guys up to the line of scrimmage to talk to get up in the face of those two running backs, because I guarantee they're going to scheme up ways to get the ball in their hands, both in the running and passing game. So that's the matchup I'm looking for, is more Iowa's front seven versus all the different ways they'll try to get Katron Allen and Nick Singleton the football.
Thank you, Erica, for the super chat, resident Hawkeye fan here in the chat. Let's talk about that Penn State run game. Let's talk about this Penn State run game. Singleton and Allen, right? Fantastic freshman year. A lot of anticipation kind of coming in this season. They've really yet to explode for some of those really explosive performances, big performances that we saw a lot last season. And now I look at this game this week, and I see Jay Higgins, I see Nick Jackson. We talked about the defensive line. Do you think that this is a game that maybe Penn State could get a little bit more explosive plays in the run game, or do you think that Iowa's going to have this bottled up?
I don't know, but I love the question, because that is the question for this game. There is a chance. So Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson are both, to me, pure middle linebackers. Okay, I don't want these guys out in space too often, but I tell you what, they love sticking their nose up into the scrum and making plays, making tackles. I think Nick Jackson can get at the quarterback a little bit when set on stunts. So maybe it's a good matchup for Iowa's defense. I don't know. I mean, that is the part that's going to be most curious for me.
Yeah, that run game. This is I know when you go into a whiteout, you go into this game for Penn State. A lot of people think whiteout, chalk it up as a W, but this one's going to be a lot more difficult than I think a lot of people think. Let's kind of fast forward to our next matchup on this one. Now let's go to Ohio State, Notre Dame for the Buckeyes here. So you go on the road. It seems like these first 3 games of the season for Ohio State were all about getting the quarterback, whether it was going to be Devin Brown, whether it was going to be Kyle McCord, getting that quarterback ready for this week when you travel to South Bend, Indiana. How prepared do you think Kyle McCord is? Because I thought that Western Michigan game, you started to see some Buckeye offense of old hitting the big plays down the field.
I think so. My question is, I don't know why Kyle McCord wasn't the guy from day one, because it sure seemed pretty obvious from the limited snaps I've seen that he is the more talented and more talented quarterback, or more just quarterback that fits the system that Ryan Day wants to do. As far as how ready he'll be, I don't know. I mean, that is going to be the most unique environment he started in as a human being. You don't get like that in high school. He's never been the man up to this point at Ohio State. You're asking good questions, because that is the number one thing for me, along with what will Ryan Day's plan of attack be? What will Notre Dame's defensive plan of attack be? Meaning, do you play Ohio State what you think you should play, which is they're going to attack you through the air? And if that's the case, does Ryan Day see that, possibly take advantage of it in the rushing attack? That's going to be very intriguing to me on how those first couple series go with when Ohio State's on offense.
Notre Dame, of course, Sam Hartman is, boy, he might be the best quarterback that they've had since maybe Brady Quinn. I mean, Jimmy Clausen was highly touted high school quarterback, but didn't have the best college career. You might have to go back to Brady Quinn, 06, 2005, 2006, something like that. It's been a while since Notre Dame has had a quarterback talent like him. On the other side, though, you guys have I talked about on your podcast a few during their first few weeks. This is an Ohio State defense that's pretty darn good right now. I'm very excited to see this matchup, especially on the O-line. You got Joe Alt, former offensive tackle from here around the Twin Cities, Totino Grace High School, going up against JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, and some of these other great rush defensive ends. What is the key for Ohio State on defense to slow down this Notre Dame offense that's been scoring in the mid-40s per game here?
Yeah, Iowa legacy, Joe Alt. I tell you what, Hartman has been incredible. I mean, we all saw Notre Dame just boat race Navy, week 0. And we're like, okay, it's Navy. Navy doesn't look as bad now. And I tell you what, they have looked, meaning Notre Dame, about the same about every game they played, which is good. This is going to be a great matchup. I really like Ohio State's defense. It's the proverbial year 2, under their defensive coordinator, where you see the jump. I definitely see a good defense. I think the thing that myself, and I think a lot of Big Ten fans, if I could speak for Ohio State fans, where is the just fear of God pass rusher on the D-line? Typically coming out of the defensive end. They've got candidates for it. It just hasn't popped yet. That, I guess, is the one thing I'm kind of missing, is just the absolute, first round draft pick guy on the D line. So can this Notre Dame offensive line that's got its own, 4 and 5 stars on it, can they neutralize that defensive line for Ohio State? And if that's the case, it could be interesting to see what Sam Hartman can do.
So everybody's talking Sam Hartman, and he's been great. No question about that, as we just talked about. But remember last year when you had C.J. Stroud on this team, and you had at the time, of course, I think he got injured during this game. You had Jackson Smith and Jigba on this team. This was a pretty low-scoring game, if my memory serves me correct. And this kind of turned into a more defensive battle. And this is where we saw Audric Estime, the Notre Dame running back, kind of creep into more national conversations as well. In theory, with Hartman over here, Kyle McCord hitting his stride over here, it looks like an offensive showdown. But we've seen that with 2 good offenses, and especially with Ohio State, I should say, last season, that this can turn into a defensive game. Do you think there's a chance that this could turn into a game kind of like last year, where it's not as high scoring and high flying with these offenses as we've seen from them so far?
Ted, we might share the same brain on some of this stuff, because that's kind of what I have been, that's what I've been kind of saying all week long here is, did people forget about last year? Mostly the same staffs, right? And this was, or was it 2 years ago? Excuse me. right? Last year, help me out. I think it was last year, right?
Year
that
they played
they played in the horseshoe.
Yeah.
Low scoring game, right? I mean, anybody who bet the over in that game was wrong right from the get-go, you know? I'm not saying it's going to be that low scoring. I think the game total is 54 and a half. I think it'll approach that, but I feel like it's going to stay under. Would be unless Ohio State can pop big plays in the passing attack. So, but I think if I'm Notre Dame, that's what I'm fighting against is the big plays in the passing game. Make Ryan Day stay steady and use the rushing attack. I think that's the plan of attack we're going to see, and all of that to me screams under.
It does. I think you're right. I think it's going to approach. I think it's going to be very close. If you're throwing money on that over-under, be careful because it might just be a point or two maybe on either side. Very curious to see. That was an interesting number that you threw on that over-under as well. So we got Notre Dame. We got Ohio State on NBC. We've got Iowa and Penn State on CBS. There's going to be a lot of dual screens in Big Ten country. Yeah. I see you shaking your head.
4 games at night, 1 game early and 2 games in the afternoon. It's just dumb. Giving these TV people too much control over this stuff is stupid. And this weekend, it's going to be a fun weekend of Big Ten football. It could be a touch better if Ted and I think, made the TV schedules on how this could go.
Kind of backtracking a little bit. This kind of escaped my mind. We were talking about Iowa Penn State before. What were your thoughts on the Iowa Black Pants making their debut, at least with the white tops, I think, for this game against Penn State?
I like the look. I just wish it wasn't this game. Bit of a traditionalist myself. I think the Iowa road kits and especially the Penn State home kits are, a slice of Big Ten. Just leave those uniforms for this game. I'd rather see in the black breeches against maybe Wisconsin or how about Nebraska, seeing as how it's Black Friday. But don't get me wrong. Once the game kicks off, they'll look sharp.
I think last year was that Wisconsin game where they wore the all blacks as well, if I remember, kind of on Veterans Day or near Veterans Day, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
In that game as well. We got a comment here that I just want to get to because you kind of talked about it before. I kind of share a similar opinion right now here. Let's go from Cole. Nebraska going to have the best defense in the West. Do you think right now, as we stand, they do have the best defense in the West Division? Or do you go with someone like Iowa or Illinois or something?
Right now, I would say the only competitor to Nebraska for the best defense in the West is Iowa. I'm not seeing it out of Wisconsin, okay? Not seeing it out of, obviously, Northwestern. We thought Illinois would be. Going to have to see some improvement until I get there. Minnesota, very, very good, but just kind of got touched up by North Carolina. So, I don't know if I can see the best defense in the West to Nebraska right now, but I would say it's been the best defense in the West so far.
Their secondary is something that really stood out to me, especially the first Minnesota game. It seems like they were on their Minnesota receivers' hip pocket all night. I think Ethan tried to hit a couple of deep balls downfield, and they were right there. So, Cole, thanks for the super chat as well. So we continue on here. Let's kind of go on one that I'm very interested in, and I saw we had our guy Keep Chopping here in the chat tonight. Let's talk about Michigan and let's talk about Rutgers. Noon game, BTN. I want to first say this. I tweeted this earlier in the week. This should be big noon Saturday. This should be the big noon game instead of Oklahoma and a Cincinnati team that lost to Miami, Ohio last week. But we talked about TV. We talked about scheduling already. We all know how we feel about that. Michigan this season, they haven't dominated a weak non-conference schedule, maybe like we expected them to. Sure, they've taken care of business. Sure, their defense looks good and all that. Why do you think, has it been the shuffling of coaches? Maybe Blake and Donovan Edwards are still trying to get back to 100%. Why do you think we haven't seen the Michigan that we're used to seeing, especially against a weaker non-conference schedule?
All those things right there. so my co-host for the season, Jordan at JW Eggleston 7, Michigan guy. We kind of had the same conversation after the Bowling Green game this weekend. It's just people think that a head coach being on the sideline means nothing. That sounds like people that haven't spent a lot of time on a sideline of a major college football game, in my opinion. Depends on the head coach, but some head coaches have some pretty good influence over something that they would like to see as the game goes on. Methinks Jim Harbaugh is one of those coaches that has the ability to, hey, how about we attack this corner right here? You know what? I think, we need to get something going outside here and then play off that. Like, I think that's what Jim Harbaugh is great at, and I think that's what's been missing. My guess is Jim Harbaugh's kind of enjoyed the fact that him not being on the sideline, maybe people miss him a little bit more than they thought they were going to. I do think it makes a difference. And then if you look at just the overall, the defense is doing exactly what you want the defense, because this has nothing to do with the performance of the Michigan defense. It really just comes down to the lack of 2 or 3 explosive plays that you saw out of Michigan for seemingly the first 2 full months of the season last year. That's what has been missing. I will be interested to see if Harbs can help that out Saturday. However, this is a good Rutgers defense. So lots of, good Rutgers defense. It's just because they've been playing crap teams. You can only play what's on your schedule. And I can tell you what, there's a lot of pretty good defenses that wouldn't be doing what Rutgers has done to some of the for these first 3 games. The Rutgers defenses looked awesome.
I want to thank Dave, Minnesota Dave, here for the super chat. We're all in the same boat here, Dave. Minnesota and Northwestern in prime time, baby. Akron and Indiana in prime time as well. So thanks for the super chat and the support there, Dave. Let's get into this game, Michigan and Rutgers. Another thing I tweeted earlier in the week, boy, when Rutgers plays defense, it looks like it hurts. It looks painful. Mm-hmm. Man, do they come up to the line of scrimmage, and man, do they hit hard. This is a Greg Schiano has been working to build his kinds of team and from his kind of mentality. Tough, physical, bring your lunch pail to work, kind of like the team on the other side of the ball in Michigan. This is a real deal defense. Do you think they are a top 5 defense? Do you think that this Rutgers defense can kind of give Michigan some problems? Maybe early, you got to think Michigan eventually and their talent is going to win out, but do you think Rutgers can kind of keep it close early?
Yes, and I expect that to happen. A little too early to say if it's a top 5 defense. I'm assuming you mean in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Definitely has a chance. My question is, can Rutgers score themselves against this Michigan defense? It's almost like somehow at the number 2 team in the country, defending double Big Ten championship, Michigan Wolverines. Somehow their defense is like flying under the radar a little bit. It's an amazing defense. I think Michigan is going to do what they can to bottle up Kyle McCord. My question is, when Gavin Wimsatt tucks it and keeps it, can he get the edge and crease Michigan here and there? That I'm interested to see. I don't think they're going to have the game plan of Wimsatt going back there and bombing 28 times in this game, but 28 or maybe 15 attempts and 13-14 carries, that I'm going to see. I think out of Wimsatt, when he does it and go, can he get some yards? It's going to be interesting.
Boy, this Rutgers run game is so good. When you said the fun guy, Kyle McCord, can kind of get yards and he can kind of bowl forward. And then I've been kind of watching. It happened in the Virginia Tech game where Gavin Wimsatt, he pulls it, he takes it himself. Quarterback run game, I think, is going to be very interesting. So Michigan defensive ends and players on the edge got to be honest and try to keep him to the inside, not let him get to the outside as well. But kind of like you mentioned, Rutgers is not going to be able to throw on Michigan. Michigan's got a really good secondary. Michigan's got a really good pass rush and all that.
Not consistently. Yeah. I think they can scheme up a play or two, but not consistently, yeah.
remember Rutgers, right? That 2021 season where Michigan went to the Big Ten, won the Big Ten, went to the college football playoff. That was a 20-13 game, if my memory serves me correct. So, yep. And that was before Rutgers got better. That was still in down here Rutgers, and this is a very much improved Rutgers team. That's going to be a bowl team, right? Don't you think? Let's say they lose to Michigan. I think they got Wagner the next week. That's a 4-1 team with, and they got some of their East Division opponents. I forgot who their West crossovers are. I know they got Wisconsin on there this year. This is going to be a bowl team, right? If they get to 4-1 the rest of the way?
I very much have my mind set on a bowl game if I'm a Rutgers fan. I agree. I mean, tough for me to see them beat Michigan. I very much think they'll beat Wagner. 2 wins from the second half of the season. Yeah, anybody that has Rutgers season over has to be feeling pretty good right now.
We'll talk about that Michigan State and Maryland game in just a minute, but considering where, and I kind of talked about this at the top of the show, considering where Michigan State's program is, I know they just played Washington, who could be like a playoff team, and they're really, really good, but that's kind of trending more towards it's going to be a more competitive game. And I think it's in Piscataway this year as well. So we got Michigan and Rutgers maybe competitive early in the noon slot. We'll see kind of how things move on. This is going to be a fun one. This next one, Purdue and Wisconsin on a Friday night. Now, I've been listening to your podcast, I think, for about 2 years-ish now. I remember last year you guys did a preview. I think it was Purdue, Nebraska. And you were talking about 2 guys sitting across the table from each other. And they were just down in shots to see how crazy can this one get. Considering how the pass defense, and it got crazy between Purdue and Nebraska. Right. Considering where the pass defenses are, you got 2 pretty good quarterbacks in Hudson Card or Tanner Mordecai. Do you think, maybe not quite to the extent of Purdue, Nebraska, but do you think this one could get pretty back and forth kind of crazy on a Friday night at Ross-Ade?
I'm expecting it to be crazy.
Yeah.
I'll be disappointed if it's not crazy. I have next to zero faith in Purdue's defense. It looks decent in fits and starts, but not consistently over a whole game that I've seen. Wisconsin, I'm wondering if they have committed so much time and effort to forcing turnovers because they don't have faith in their front seven getting stops. Meanwhile, both offenses have not been well-oiled machines, or at least have not been a model of consistency, but we've seen it in stretches. Sometimes you got to trust your gut. My gut, Ted, is telling me both of these offenses are going to find their stride in this game. Purdue always plays with its hair on fire at home. With that being said, Wisconsin is not going to go away quietly into the night. I see a fun game to start the Big Ten weekend. In complete honesty, if I could pick any of these games this weekend to be played on Friday night, it would be Wisconsin-Purdue.
I said at the beginning of the season, and I feel more strongly about it now. I looked at this game and I circled it, and I'm like, Friday night, West Lafayette, things can get weird and on a Friday. I don't know. This is just a feel of one of those, because there were such high expectations for Wisconsin. We weren't sure about Purdue. And there's still maybe Wisconsin, maybe it's dropped a tick after Washington State and what we've seen lately. But it seems like craziness to me. That's just the vibe I get from this game. Let's kind of break down a little bit more from this. I want to talk about this Wisconsin offense a little bit. Braylon Allen committed to Paul Christ, committed to single back, 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, offensive line, what Wisconsin has been since Barry Alvarez got on campus. And now you got this spread rushing attack. And it seems to me, and I'm curious to what you think, it seems to fit Chez Mellusi more. Every time I kind of turn up and I see, because usually I'm flipping between games, every time I turn up and see the TV, like on Georgia Southern this weekend, I see Chez Mellusi in the backfield. And I don't see a lot of Braylon Allen. I know he got more later in the game. But it seems like this offense, and Phil Longo wants to feature Chez Mellusi more than Braylon Allen, and some people out there have said Braylon Allen kind of looks a little bit slow in this offense. Do you think that this offense and Braylon Allen aren't exactly the perfect marriage, or how do you view Agent Zero's performance thus far?
I mostly agree with what you're saying and other people. It's certainly not you alone that said that. Chelui, as we call him on the Eyes on Big podcast, I think he's finally healthy. I agree that he's more of a fit for what Longo wants to do. I'm just not buying into this thing that Braylon Allen doesn't fit into this offense. He's big, strong, and fast, and has good vision. I tend to believe that fits almost any single offense. I do think, though, that maybe there was something with the timing of the more hat-on-hat offense blocking schemes under Chris the last couple years, that it's took Braylon Allen, for whatever reason, a little bit longer to get that timing down with his O-line, understanding what Longo wants out of him. So I'm just not writing the guy off. And also, his stats aren't bad. His stats were awful during Washington State, but the home opener, Buffalo, and last week, they're still, pretty good. He just needs the ball. And that would be my biggest thing is I think Braylon Allen is the type that needs to get lathered up and then run, the other team over. I think he'll get that chance on Friday night. So my guess is there'll be a lot of people perfectly happy with Braylon Allen that want to see him get going.
And I looked up the Big Ten rushing stats. He's, I think, top 5, top 6 in the Big Ten in rushing. And you wouldn't guess it based on kind of what you heard. But I think it's maybe more of I think maybe some people were expecting a little bit more out of maybe 60-40 Braylon Allen or something. But, I think it's more closer to 50-50, which is totally fine. It looks like it's going to work. And I'm very curious to see how they implement it against Purdue. A loss here for Purdue sets them back to 1-3. I picked them to go 6-6 this season. But that 6-6 had a 3-0 start. So I'm not overly confident in Purdue right now making a bowl game if they come out on the short end against Wisconsin. You still got the Buckeyes on the schedule. Still got the Wolverines on the schedule. You still got the rest of the Big Ten West. And then Indiana, of course, is the old Oak and Bucket game. A loss here. Does this kind of do in Purdue's bowl hopes in your mind? Or where do you see this team if they take the L against Wisconsin on Friday night?
Yeah, I mean, the bowl game this year is on the proverbial life support if they don't win this game. I also had them at 6-6. Felt like you and I were out alone on that one as well. And maybe the public was right, because if they do lose this game, sitting at 1-3, you and I will almost for sure officially be wrong on what we thought Purdue could be. But I think all of those reasons is why we're going to get a fired up Ross Aid and a fired up Purdue team on Friday night.
I mean, they win, and then they're 2-2, and all of a sudden now this thing flips back. So this game against Wisconsin kind of seems like it's going to twist kind of one way or the other. I want to. This is a question that I do know the answer to, but I also want your opinion on this. Jared, the Big Ten does not play a Friday night game every single week. But Jeff, what's kind of your impression on Friday night games in the Big Ten? I usually have to work a lot of high school football games, so I'm not a huge fan of it because I'm usually working. But what's kind of your impression of the Friday night time slot that we're going to see, that we've seen a decent amount, and that's kind of been rumored that we could maybe see more of in the future?
So one of my favorite sayings is, I'm not much, but I'm all I ever think about. So I'm just going to worry about me here. I love Friday night games because they don't bother me. I have 2 small kids that don't have Friday night activities. If my kid was playing in a Friday night high school football game, I would hate it. I hope that happens someday. But as of right now, I just don't got much going on Friday night. So the fact that I can pour myself a nice stiff Amador bourbon and watch a Big Ten game on Friday night, I love it. With that being said, people that don't like it because they believe it should be left for the high schools, I do understand that. That's not something I'm ever going to, necessarily disagree with somebody about.
I'm in the same boat as when I don't have to work a Friday night, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a crazy game. All that stuff like we kind of talked about before. So thanks, Jared, for the comment and the talking point on that one. I want to touch on another game here, Maryland to Michigan State. This seems, we kind of talked about the teetering point for Purdue. This seems to be a teetering point, possibly, considering everything that's going on right now for Michigan State. Maryland is a team that's got to show up in the first quarter. How do you see that? It seems like if Maryland starts and does not get into a 14-0 hole, that they're going to be just fine in the football game. What say you?
I think every scenario is on the table for this game, more than any game we have this weekend, meaning close win for either team, blowout or semi-blowout for either team. That's right. People might scoff at that, saying there's no way, Michigan State would blow out Maryland. They're playing at home, and Michigan State, if they get off to a slow start like they have the last two games, that was against Charlotte and a, pretty awful Virginia team. I think Michigan State is a definite step up from Charlotte and Virginia. So if we get a slow start like that and Michigan State gets that O-line and Carter rushing attack going downhill, I'm just saying, with that being said, on the other side, that was the last 2 years Sparty secondary we saw, last Saturday. Maryland wants to throw the ball down the field. Can they see some of the things that Washington did and try to exploit the same stuff? I probably like this game more than most Big Ten fans that aren't obviously a Maryland and Michigan State fan. I'm very intrigued by this game.
I'd have to look at the lines and the over-under on this game, but if I'm a gambler...
We got Terps by 7 and a hook, and the over-under is 53.5.
I don't think I'm putting money on this one because I just don't know where it's going to go. That's kind of the boat I'm in right now.
That's why you gamble, baby. That's why you gamble.
I get this. This is what.
Well, usually in that case, that's when you take the points, right? If you can see it go another way, I might be, hint, nodding for anybody that listens to the Eyes on Big podcast Wednesday night or Thursday morning. Lots that could happen here.
Our guy Keep Chopping Rutgers fans kind of feeling the same way in this one. So people coming into the season for Maryland, is this the year that Locks maybe competes? Maybe they take down one of the big boys and they still look good. They kind of reloaded at wide receiver and they look pretty good. But it's the lines, it's the trenches that seem concerning right now. Have you backed off Maryland? I don't know where you were with Maryland kind of coming into the season, but now after these last 2 weeks, have you cooled on Maryland as you were kind of coming into the season?
Haven't cooled, haven't heated up. They're pretty much what I expected them to be. So I would have to go look at my, game by game prediction. I think I might have actually had Michigan State winning this game back in August. Pretty sure I had Maryland at 7-5 for their predicted season. I will say I'm kind of in the middle of watching the Maryland-Virginia game, rewatching the Maryland-Virginia game right now. I don't think the O&D line are necessarily as bad as anti-Maryland fans want to say it is. Certainly not a strength of the team. My thing is the penalties, the turnovers, the blown coverages, like the overall mental mistakes. I think I have more of a concern with that if I'm a Maryland fan, as opposed to just the outright lack of skill on the O&D line. So however it works out on Saturday, that's going to be a big part of the game. Is can Maryland just play a cleaner game?
Want to see them start fast, and then maybe we'll see what happens there. I kind of want to touch on, I got the schedule pulled up here for this week. I kind of want to touch on a few other teams. I don't think we touched on Nebraska and the running back situation. They got two running backs that kind of go down for the season this week in Gabe Irvin Jr. and Ramir Johnson. And then you talk about the turnovers from Jeff Sims, and now he's hurt. Man, this was a program, of course, that needed a little bit of a boost with a new coach in Matt Rule, and it's not going the right direction. It's not going the right direction. Where do you see this Nebraska program right now? They get Louisiana Tech this week. In theory, they should be able to get back to 2-2. And we talked about their defense, but on offense, kind of where do you see that going now? I mean, Anthony Grant was the bell cow last year. Like, he almost rushed for 1,000 yards. They should be fine, but where do you kind of see this team considering that the injuries that they've had?
I think Nebraska fans should be happy that Matt Rule is not a Nebraska fan, okay? Because Matt Rule's not freaking out. My guess is a couple things on how they went down those first two games, maybe not exactly what he was expecting, but in the he's not going to waver from what he knows he needs to do. If that means they sacrifice a cheap win to work on what he feels they need to improve on, he will do that. Long story short, he's going to rely on the defense, and I think it improves special teams, and he's just going to keep focus on rushing the ball and not turning the ball over. Even if that means we're down to what could very quickly be very young freshman running backs. Build to the future. Now all of a sudden Nebraska fans at the end of the year, they've got guys coming back running the ball that had a bunch of carries as freshmen and true freshmen. Build for next year. I'm sticking with Heinrich Harburg if I'm Rule, at least for another game or two. I know that after this weekend it's Michigan. I know what Jeff Sims looks like in big games. It ain't good. So another build the future type of thing. Nebraska kid with Harburg. That's what I'm doing. In the end, Rule's going to put the person out there that gives him the best chance to win the game. Don't get me wrong. I think it should be Harburg, and I think Rule will stick with Harburg.
So you think that right now, and I think I'm in the same camp as you. Heinrich Harburg gives Nebraska a better chance to win than Jeff Sims, just by his ability to protect the football, correct?
100%. I mean, how different would that Minnesota game look if just take the turnovers away? Colorado as well. They were right in that game, sputtering on offense just because they were kind of moving the ball and he would give it up. Now, the running back thing we kind of gloss over a little bit. Irvin is a huge loss. I was never quite as big of a Ramir Johnson fan as maybe Nebraska fans are, but you loved what he could do as kind of like the second, flare out, third down type of back. Anthony Grant is a combination of both. I think he could be your first and second down back and your third down back. The issue is the fumbling that apparently has popped up just this fall. And then even bigger issues if he goes down, because now we're into freshmen. But I don't think you worry about that if you're Matt Rule. You run your offense and see how much better you can get, and Anthony Grant's just going to have to be your guy.
Yeah, as you guys say a lot on your show, pair and a spare, no more, unless we find a couple of freshmen here that are going to be able to step up here in the backfield for Nebraska. Another game we got going on this weekend, we talked about it before, in primetime on BTN, Minnesota travels to Northwestern. Let's talk about the Golden Gophers here for just a minute. We talked about Darius Taylor and how he looks really good right now. He's separating himself maybe a little bit. It's him and Sean Tyler. It looks like. Sounds like Zach Taylor is a little bit in the doghouse right now. But Minnesota, is this kind of what you expected? I thought that they would throw the ball a little bit better. It seems like things are taking a little bit to get up to speed for Ethan Kaliak-Manis in this offense. But this is still a PJ Fleck offense, so it shouldn't, I guess, surprise anybody that they're trying to run the ball this much. Where do you stand on Minnesota right now, specifically with their passing game and their balance on offense?
It shouldn't surprise us, but we both are kind of surprised, right? And PJ kind of tipped his hat a little bit even before the season started and said, listen, guys, we're still going to run the ball here, I picked 6-6 for Minnesota. Got torched by Minnesota fans with that one. I think Minnesota fans probably feel kind of lucky. If maybe in a dark room, they might admit that they were pretty lucky to pull that Nebraska game out. Didn't look great versus Carolina. That was a tough spot. That's why I picked Carolina to cover in that game. Now you got to look good this weekend. And I don't know how confident Nebraska or Minnesota fans are that they're going to easily cover this. I think it's like an 11.5-point spread versus Northwestern in this spot. That it's a night game. This should be an 11 o'clock game. I joked on Twitter this should be a 10 a.m. game before it's a night game. And how, if Minnesota looks good, how is that going to look? It sure seems to be relying on a true freshman running back. Okay, that's fine versus Eastern Michigan. Maybe it's good this weekend versus Northwestern over time. That would make me nervous. I want to see Callie McManus turn things around. We knew he would have an up and down year. I thought it would look a little bit different than it did versus Carolina. So very interested to see how Callie McManus looks, and then because of that, how the game plan is for how much they're going to throw.
Yeah, exactly. That Minnesota, it's at Northwestern. That Minnesota, if this is a noon game, this would remind me of a sleepy Saturday morning Northwestern. We get them, it seems like every handful of years, where it's a sleepy, Ohio State, right? In that windstorm last year kind of had it, where it's just, it seems like every 2 to 3 years you get that noon game at Northwestern, which obviously isn't this week, but you get that noon game at Northwestern where the team's not waking up yet. There's about 15 to 20,000 people in the stadium, and they kind of, oh crap, we got to play football here in the middle of the second quarter. But obviously that's not this week. But if it was, I could see that possibly happening with that game over there. One surprise, we talked about our surprises earlier in the show, that I was thinking about putting on there was this Indiana defense right now. A lot of transfers on this team all across, especially the secondary. And I've been impressed with how they've played, with how Tom Allen and company have kind of put this defense together. Do you kind of share the same sentiment, or how do you kind of feel about Indiana thus far?
Yeah, I don't want to break my arm patting myself on the back, but I thought Indiana's defense would be much improved. I said so much on the preseason podcast. I flirted between 5-7 and 6-6 for Indiana until I've settled on 5-7. The 6-6 team that I thought I might see, I think it's looked a lot like what we've seen so far. We saw it right from the jump, getting right up in Ohio State's face and looking good, as good as you could expect to look against Ohio State. Got to get the win this weekend, expect them to. I've dubbed their defense the Island of Misfit Toys because it just seems like it's, some freshmen, some senior guys, JUCOs, guys they brought in just because of NIL. It's all working together, and Tommy Allen has looked good. And then David Jackson at quarterback, the Hoosier lineage in that family. He looked great last week. I know they didn't get the win. Shame on them. They definitely could have. But I know this isn't a game that necessarily people are going to tune into a whole bunch. This could be an 11 o'clock game. At least then it would be, a game you could click in on and check in with. But get some momentum going in this game, get an easy win, and then see where the rest of the season goes after you're 2-2.
That's Indiana. I keep referencing Michigan State's schedule, but Indiana is one of those games, for some teams that I'd have to go back and check their schedule that could maybe create some problems depending on the matchup, time, location, and all that stuff. Let's talk about Illinois. They play FAU this week. Casey Thompson sounds like he's out for the season, so this one might be a little bit easier than it already was. Illinois, I think last week to me, proved, and I the front seven, it just seems like they needed to get it together. Secondary, of course, Matthew Bailey had kind of been out for a while, but this still seems like an Illinois team. Luke Altmaier is going to carry that team as far as he can humanly take them right now. Do you think this is still an Illinois team that can compete for a West Division title when all is said and done?
I thought they were going to. I mean, I had him second in the West, but that was because I thought that defense would look amazing again. We saw snippets last week. The theory amongst Illinois insiders is that the style of defense that was being played against the mobile quarterbacks the first 2 weeks is what was holding that front seven back. They unleashed them last week versus Penn State. I think they're going to get unleashed again on Saturday. Let's maybe look at Illinois again in another week or two and see what it looks like on defense. On the other side, I think Luke Altmaier needs to quit trying to be the first, second, and third option on the offense. I think they need to force a rushing attack down their own throat, if that makes sense, that isn't him carrying the ball, develop this rushing attack, then, get some of the passing game, Luke Altmaier keeping the ball. Let's get that off of the rushing attack. I would think that's what you would see starting this weekend.
Boy, it seems like because right now he's the leading rusher. He is. I mean, Reggie Love it seems like Love and McCray are getting a teeny bit better, but if he's your rushing attack, if he's your passing attack, he's eventually, it seems like he's going to get worn down. And then what happens if he gets hit on a run play and all of a sudden you're down to John Paddock or for whoever their backup quarterback is, and now you lost your quarterback and your top running back. So as you said, getting Reggie Love and Josh McCray going a little bit more is very important over there. Jeffery the Greek joining us from the Eyes on Big podcast here this evening. So you guys have been doing your show for a little bit now. How many years have you, because obviously it started, Kurt's not available, of course, during this season, but how many years back did you and Kurt kind of start the show?
One of these days I'm going to look it up. I know it's our fifth season. It's
okay.
either our fifth or sixth. You would think let's go with fifth season. But yeah, we were kind of the only ones out there 5-6 years ago when we started this thing, and mostly it was because Kurt and I were both transplanted into Minnesota. At the time, not a ton of college football fans around this area, and then him and I were both sales guys traveling around all the time, listening to college sports radio, listening to podcasts, and it was just SEC, blue blood, SEC. So I just said one day, I'm like, let's just start our own podcast and let's just talk about every single Big Ten team. Rutgers, Illinois, obviously Ohio State, Michigan, all of them. So that was our goal. 6, whatever it is, years later, that's still our goal, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I'll say, yeah, it's definitely. I always make sure I hit the listen button on the Eyes on Big when I'm driving to work here around here as well. It's a great source of information. You mentioned Jordan is joining you. He's of Michigan fanhood this year, and he's kind of provided a lot of good insight as well on the Michigan side of things thus far. Over there on the show that you guys got going on. I had a comment here, and I'm going to kind of scroll back up to this. And so Michigan State is kind of going through their issues. Dallas kind of chiming in. Who do you think Sparty could get in Mel Tucker's place as well? And Jeff, I can kind of extend. I'll kind of say my piece, and then you can jump in if you kind of want to here. Michigan State proved that they want to invest money into their head coach. Would they pay Mel Tucker $9 million a year or something like that with their new contract? Mike Elko has been floated out there as a hot name. I heard Brian Hartline was in a list, who's the current offensive coordinator at Ohio State, that's floated out there. So Jeff, I'll kind of push this to you. What do you think Michigan State should kind of look for in their next head coach? Do you think they should back up the Brinks truck, a $9 or $10 million deal to somebody, or should you get more of this kind of up and coming like the Mike Elko at Duke, who's been putting together some good seasons at Duke? Where do you think Michigan State should kind of go from here?
Yeah, the Hartline doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I would think the best thing I could say about Hartline is it would maybe make one of your in-conference rivals weaker. If you took his recruiting away from Ohio State. I don't know if I've seen enough out of him to take over a Big Ten, Power 5 type of football program. Mike Elko, it's funny you keep mentioning that. That would be my pick. I just read an article today, listed off it was like 10 candidates, and I said, Matt Campbell, no, come on.
No.
Mark Stoops, no, that's not going to work. Mike Elko, age, fit, that one makes a lot of sense to me. He looks like a Michigan State guy. I know that I shouldn't play into it, but the style of ball that I think you want to see out of Michigan State, very similar to Iowa. I hate when Iowa gets compared to almost any football program, but in all honesty, Michigan State is a fair comparison on how I think you need to build both of those programs to play and be successful. Mike Elko seems to be a great fit to get that style of play back out of Michigan State.
And you've got, of course, we're going to have Northwestern, and of course, they're going to be bringing in a coach of their own. And the cupboard is pretty bare, let's put it that way, at Northwestern. I think some people were kind of floating out there. Who's going to want to? Some people want the challenge of a rebuild, but this Northwestern job that's a rebuild amongst a rebuild. It almost seems like Michigan State has a lot more resources. Remember, a couple of years ago, they won 11 games. They beat Michigan 2 years ago. If that kind of tells us anything, that this Michigan State job, especially with transfers now, you can flip a team just like that, and you can turn this thing around. And Michigan State is kind of that job where, yeah, you can bring in talent. There's resources. There's things you can do to try to compete in the Big Ten. And Mike Elko, you throw him in there, you get his guys in there. That could be one that could maybe flip, especially in a non-divisional format where maybe Michigan State doesn't have to play Ohio State every year. They're going to play Michigan, but they don't have to play Penn State every year.
Yep.
I want to kind of flip to that.
I mean, but one thing I would say is, in general, people keep saying that about Maryland and Michigan State. But if you lose Ohio State and you pick up Oregon and USC, does it make that much of a difference? I don't think it does. I think people are overplaying that when they think that Maryland and Michigan State and Rutgers are suddenly going to get this scheduling advantage. I think that's how the schedule is going to fall every year or every other year when they release the scheduling.
So let's kind of talk about that because we got four new brethren coming in next season out on the West Coast next year. I've kind of listened to interviews that you've done in your show. You've been a big defender of the Big Ten West, and there's a lot of people out there that kind of throw some jabs at the Big Ten West. Are you relieved maybe you don't have to defend as much, or kind of where are you at with divisions going away, and kind of people won't obviously be bagging on the Big Ten West because there will be no Big Ten West in the future?
Yeah, I've been trying to work on analogies for this. It's like moving from a small, old, but cozy house into a bigger, nicer house. And you know that moving into the bigger, nicer house is better, but boy, you had a smaller lawn to mow at the other house. And, I think I'll miss parts of the Big Ten West, but at the same time, I'm not going to miss people bagging on it all the time. And all I've ever really said is this. Nobody is doubting that Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State are the kings of the conference. That is obvious. It's just after you get past those teams, Maryland and Indiana have not done well against the Big Ten West at all. Okay. Michigan State has fallen off the map. Rutgers has been awful against the Big Ten West. So my thing is, I just think the Big Ten West in general is better than what people think it is. However, I've never been one to say the Big Ten West is chocked with elite talent and top teams for the college football playoff. It's just better than what people think.
Somewhere buried on my Google Drive somewhere, I put together a document comparing because the Big Ten West will stop at 10 years, right? 2014. I compared it to the last 10 years of remember the Big 12 North, right? Remember all those years where there were some unranked, there was a good amount of a run where there were a lot of unranked teams that ended up making it. Last year, of course, we had an unranked Purdue. But if you kind of go back throughout the recent history, maybe 2019, 2018, there was a run there. And once again, I'd have to dig up this document once again, where the Big Ten West had a run where you had top 10, top 15 teams playing for the Big Ten championship. Wisconsin had some teams in there. Northwestern, I think, was top 15 maybe at one point, 2018, 2020. I can't exactly remember. But you go to the Big 12 North really after Nebraska kind of fell off in 2002-ish. I know you had Kansas and Missouri, right, in 2000, crazy year in 07. But you take that out, there was a lot of, I think there were more unranked teams in the Big 12 North that made it to their championship. And that's, I think, comparable, right? That you remember the Big 12, the South was loaded with Oklahoma, with Texas. Texas Tech was pretty solid at that point as well. So, that was the historical comparison I made. But it's all going to be for naught here next year, and it's going to completely change as well. So obviously you've been a fan of college football for a long time. I've been a fan of college football for a long time. This season seems like the last year of normal college football. I mean, you could maybe go back a little bit, but in terms of drastic seismic shifting, this is the final year. What are your thoughts going in 12-team playoff, 18-team leagues, and all of the realignment through all of this right now? Are you trying to savor it for what it is right now, or are you trying to get used to the change, maybe following those West Coast programs a little bit more? What are kind of your thoughts on the just sheer seismic shifts that are going on in the sport?
All of the above. I am certainly savoring this season. No doubt about it.
Sure.
I thought maybe, as the summer went on and the news hit with, Oregon and Washington, I thought maybe I'd be more clued in to those new teams. I'm not. I do think Washington's fun to watch because of Penix, and at least with Penix, he's a former Big Ten football player a little bit there, but man, I'm just dialed in on the Big Ten and the 14 teams we have because this is the last year I'll have with this. I'm old beyond my years. I would go back to polls and bowls if it was up to me. I feel like a lot of this stuff would work itself out if we did. I know that the ketchup is completely squeezed out and we're never going to get it put back in. Will I watch every single second of the games that are on a 12-team playoff? Of course I will. I mean, I was jonesing for week 0 football, so I'm going to watch those games. I just hope we keep almost all, if not all, of the college football mystique and feel of it. You start to wonder sometimes, like, at some point, do these universities say, well, these bands, they're too expensive. We got to cut them out because getting rid of these bands gets us one more recruit. I'm not a band guy. I mean, I played football in Iowa. The band people would walk up to me and say they were as big a part of the football program as the players, and I'd roll my eyes, but they're a part of college football in the fabric. And I'm just kind of pontificating here a little bit, but you know what I'm getting at. Like, we need to keep as much of the heart of this sport. We will see. People that say it's never going to change and you're this and that, you don't know that. You just think you know that. We are going to see how this experiment plays out over the next decade.
Well, that's experiment. That's a very interesting word, because I think that's what this all is. Because I think even TV executives, they don't know how this is all going to play out. I can't remember. This is, well, yeah, that's very true. But I saw an article about this before. This might have been a year and a half ago, as it relates to West Virginia, and I thought it was very interesting as it pertained to realignment. Yep. West Virginia, historically Big East program. They play Pitt every year. Louisville, Cincinnati, Boston College, if you go a little bit further back, things like that. And they said the first year that we played Texas, the first year that we played Texas Tech, whoever, right? All these teams, when they joined the Big 12, it was cool. It was exciting the first year, maybe 2 years. But then after you got past that, there were some people that said, oh man, I kind of want to play Pitt. And now they are playing them in September out of conference. They just played them. I kind of want to play Cincinnati. I want to play Louisville. What about that game? Rutgers was a pretty solid series as well. As this kind of goes along, I'm very curious how these West Coast teams are going to be. Right now, UCLA, I know the rivalry with Cal might not be the most intense rivalry in the country, but it still is a yearly matchup. And I know that those are great examples where maybe a ton of people don't go to those games. But that's still like one matchup that you won't see every year that you've been seeing for quite literally 100 flipping years. So I guess my question to you is, do you think that this will, how do I say this? Do you think it will, for these, like the schools that are leaving the Pac-12 or maybe other schools that are changing conferences, do you think it'll affect the fan interest for maybe people that aren't super fans, maybe that don't follow it as closely as people like you and I, but maybe fans that want to go to a game every once in a while was like, well, my favorite team isn't playing this team. Well, okay, then why would I go to a West Virginia versus Utah game? You kind of know where I'm going with that?
Yep. It just never made sense to me, only bringing in UCLA and USC. It does make more sense to bring in two more West Coast teams. But even then, you think to yourself, there probably should be two more teams, to make it 6 teams from the West Coast so that you can have like a 5-team round robin. And then you get that far into it and you're like, why don't we just split them off in their own conference? And I don't know, what should we call it? Like the Pac-10? It's just so stupid. Yes, all of those things. I think it's awesome. It's a really good comparison. I think I read a whole article, maybe it was the same one you read, about how the newness has wore off in West by God, Virginia, and it's just not as good. And there's a 19-year-old kid in West Virginia right now that's not that big of a Mountaineer fan, and he doesn't even know what he missed out on the last 6-7 years of his life when he was hitting those formative years. That is sad to me. And if that happens even one more time with one more program, it's gross. And by the way, it's going to happen to Wazoo and Oregon State. There's fans that they don't deserve that. And sucks. I just don't know what to say. I hate using that word. It's a cheap, lazy grab of a word, but that's the best I can come up with when things happen like they've happened to West Virginia, Wazoo, and Oregon State. It sucks. And people acting like these things don't matter. I don't think they're seeing the big picture. And like I kind of, scoffed at or alluded to, these TV people don't care. I've read articles and the only thing they talk about is content. And this game got this audience share, what they can show to advertisers. That's all they care about. These people do not care about regional rivalries. If they thought Utah, West Virginia got 30,000 more viewers than Pitt, West Virginia, that's the game they would angle to because of that.
It's very interesting because they want these big games, USC, Ohio State, and all this stuff. And we know that's what they want. You kind of touched on that. But I'd be very curious to kind of look back. And of course, maybe TV viewership at itself, maybe it's grown over time. I don't know. But I would think, just my personal opinion on this, I would think rivalries would draw more in the heat of a West Virginia versus Pitt. I know they play now, but at the end of the season when it's all on the line, I go back to 07, was that 07 when West Virginia's top 5 team we keep on making West Virginia references. West Virginia's top 5 in the country. Pitt is barely a bowl team with Dave Wanstedt and 13-9, and then they're out of the national championship. The thing I loved about college football, I'm not even that old. I'm barely in my early 30s right now. And the thing I loved about college football, and you're still going to have it to an extent, is it had the greatest regular season in sports, right? Where every single, and then I think that's what made it so special and what gave it a sense of urgency. You see crazy finishes and Hail Marys and all these things is because if we lose this game, we're going to lose our shot to win a conference title, a national championship. Every single game was huge. I just thought that maybe rivalries would draw a little bit more in terms of TV, but I understand USC against Ohio State, Washington against Wisconsin might draw. It's just I'm kind of venting a little bit now, but that's fine. I feel like we're in the same boat or on the same ship here a little bit. I know it's good.
And the thing is, Ted, everybody I talk to is somewhat in the same boat of me and you, of understanding a tweak here and there is fine, but wholesale going away from a lot of the elements that made this sport what we love. We all feel that same thing. Yet look at the decisions being made by the TV executives that, quite frankly, a lot of these university presidents and somewhat to a certain degree ADs are just letting happen. They've got a voice. They can say no at some point, which is, like, my joke to everybody is at one point it seemed like Notre Dame, being an independent, was only going to get $60 million a year, whereas a Big Ten team would get 85. Oh gosh, how do you run an athletic department with only $60 million? Like, these are numbers that just like 8, 9, 10 years ago, every athletic department would have took. Now, if you don't have $90 or $100 million coming in every year, you can't survive. I don't buy that. That, like, you need money, don't get me wrong, but I don't know.
I would just love to see, and I know the money goes into facilities, and there's this facilities arms race to see who can have the biggest, baddest locker room in the world. I understand that, but just where all of the money goes, I'd be very, especially at a public university as taxpayers, I would just be very curious. Okay, in 2028, you're going to be getting $110 million just in TV money, not in playoff money, not in NCAA tournament basketball money, whatever. Where does all the money go? Show me where the money goes. And it better not go into your pocket. That's all I got to say. That's what I got to say about that. So there's that. It should be a great weekend of Big Ten football. I'm really excited about this. And Dallas here just chiming in. If he could bring back the Pac-8, right, when Arizona and Arizona State were in the WAC, the right. Southwest Conference, the Big 8 as well, and the OG, the original 10 before. This is the last thing I'm going to bring up on this particular topic. Additions of Penn State and Nebraska. Did you feel that those were good at the time? Did you kind of have any pushback against those? Penn State would have been in the early 90s, quite some time ago, and then Nebraska in the early 2010s.
First of all, shout out to the kind words from LFG. Nice to see. I'm with Dallas here. I'll tell you what, though, my personal favorite time of Big Ten football was the Big Ten with the hidden 11 in the icon. I loved bringing in Penn State. That to me was, I already loved Big Ten football. My older brother played football at Iowa. That was in the original Big Ten days. Right after that is when Penn State came in. When I was playing football in the Big Ten, it was with Penn State. That's the Big Ten to me. I would have loved to have stayed there. Nothing against Maryland, and Rutgers, who I've gotten to know. Certainly, Nebraska it's a rivalry. Nebraska has a rivalry with everybody in the Big Ten at some point, it seems like. But like Nebraska to me should be with Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas State and Colorado. And I think Nebraska fans would want that too.
Yeah, I agree, because Penn State, they were an independent for the longest time. So they didn't really have a ton, and I guess it's still that way. They're going with the unrivaled deal. They didn't really have a ton of connections. And of course, we've been talking about Notre Dame for since the Fielding Yost days, of course. It goes all the way back to that particular situation. But we could talk about this forever and ever. I think we're both in the same boat. But great weekend, Jeff, of Big Ten football. Really looking forward to it. You got a preview episode coming out with Jordan. When can folks expect that to drop?
If all goes well, we'll record that tomorrow evening, and I'll produce it pretty quick, so it'll be out kind of late Wednesday night for you East Coasters. It'll probably be sitting in your inbox on Thursday morning, ready to go. We break down each game with game totals and against the spread. So please tune in. If you are not following me on Twitter, I would love if you do. It's at Jeffery the Greek, at Jeffery the Greek. I pretty much talk 99% college football, mostly Big Ten. Maybe throw in a couple funny stories about my kids being knuckleheads every now and then, but always open to more listeners and more followers. And if I forget to say it at the end here, I really appreciate having me on here tonight. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Like I said, I've been listening to your show for 2 years. With Kurt, there was a Dustin who was on there, former writer, I think at Saturday Tradition. I love the food conversation during the summer. That was one of my favorites. I'm a grape nuts guy. That's why you wouldn't. I mean, this millennial. I love grape nuts. Good. Okay, and I know there's a lot of people in the chat that don't know what's going on right now, but.
Go back and listen to our rankings podcast from the summer if you're ever bored, and then you'll know it. Ted and I. That was not a manufactured laugh out of Dustin and I. Behind the scenes, we were texting each other like, "Oh God, old man Kurt, who's not much older than me, but he as far as like his style, it's like 50 years older than me. He didn't disappoint. We'll just say that."
And then you guys on the food front, because I'm all about this. When I go to college football games, I want to go to the best. I want to go to the best places in town. You guys have talked about the breaded pork tenderloin. My question to you is, when I was done listening to that episode, I came back and Googled it. I'm like, holy crap, this thing is huge. Yep. Do you know can I find a breaded pork tenderloin in the Twin Cities anywhere?
I have looked and and there are 3 different times. And one time I even went to one of the restaurants, and then I pulled up a picture of what a breaded tenderloin looks like to me, and the waitress says, "No, it doesn't look like that at all." I said, "Okay, thanks," and I walked out. I don't know what it is. I did not know that it was an Indiana thing until Dustin Schutte became Spicy Schutte, because he swears that Indiana invented it. It was a restaurant called Jonesy's in Iowa that I always knew. I gotta learn me. Gerald gets it. He says he loves tenderloins. I gotta figure out a way to make those, in house here, so I can just invite friends over, and I'll have you. If I ever learn, Ted, I'll have you over, and we'll enjoy a breaded tenderloin together.
Let's freaking do it. I gotta have one of those.
Very
What's
good.
your go-to? You guys just had your tailgate recently at the game in Minnesota. What's your go-to tailgate food? What's your like, just plain and simple? It's old reliable when you go to a tailgate. Maybe a tailgate, and then one when you're at the old DAC.
Tailgate. It's got to be easy. Right? It's got to be something that when I'm talking to my buddy and we're breaking down, the difference between how our offense will look this week against the 4-3 instead of did last week in the 3-4. I don't got time to like eat something. I just need it to pop into my mouth and just be done with it. So anything that's bite size. When I'm at home, I can get elaborate. I might smoke some ribs. I might grill a steak. Sometimes I get lazy and just order some wings to get delivered to my house. I kind of paint the board when I'm at home. The funny thing is, I don't eat a lot until the Iowa game's over, because I'm the dork that gets that wound up that I don't have as much of an appetite. Like the Iowa State game was a 2:30 game. I ate nothing all day long, and then after the game was over, my hunger came in absolute waves, and I pretty much ate everything that was in the house right after that.
For folks that are, obviously you spent some time in Iowa, where's the go-to place to eat in Iowa City? If you're attending a game at Kinnick Stadium, where do you go?
So first of all, Kinnick Stadium's food is gross. So don't ever go to Kinnick thinking you're going to get a great meal unless there's a part of the stadium that I haven't been to. But the hamburger the next day for breakfast is fantastic. Jonesy's was the tenderloin place. I think, I'm not sure if that's around. Wig and Penn's got good pizza. Look around. You can find some good food around Iowa City.
Obviously, you played there. What makes this is kind of getting off food for a little bit? What makes Kinnick Stadium? And obviously, I'm sure you've been to a bunch of games since then. What makes Kinnick Stadium such a special place to maybe play and then watch a football game? Because I've never been there, but for me, it just looks like a very intimate atmosphere. There's barely any room on the sidelines. It's kind of like those basketball atmospheres that you feel like the crowd is on top of you. What makes Kinnick Stadium such a great venue for Big Ten football?
Yeah, I think it's the simplicity of it. It's just essentially, four sides, right? It just goes up and up on from the sidelines and the end zones. They did kind of build out and have a second layer on the north end zone, but on top of that, yeah, it's loud. I've seen enough. They've asked enough Big Ten football players what's one of the loudest stadiums you played in. Kinnick always pulls well with the players, and I think it's because of what you just touched on. You're not far away from the opposing team. I had really good tickets for the Western Michigan last weekend. I was about 20 rows up on the 40-yard line, and even 20 rows up, you feel like you can almost reach out and slap the helmet of the players that are right down on the sidelines there. So you're not far away, Ted. You got to check out a game. Minnesota plays down there this year. You might want to come check that out.
I might have to take the show on the road. I'll tell you that much. That'd be great. Going down to Kinnick. It's one of the. I haven't been to a ton. I've kind of bummed out that I haven't been to as many. I've been to Camp Randall. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I was at Camp Randall when they beat #1 Wisconsin in 2010. That was still to this date when Minneapolis native David Gilreath took it all the way back to the house. The loudest I've ever heard anything. In my life was when that erupted. And then Nebraska's first Big Ten game ever was the following year in 2011. That was the Russell Wilson year, and Nebraska was the first conference game. So I went to that. College Game Day was there as well. When you were maybe as a fan, maybe traveling as a player, what were some of the environments, the stadiums that kind of stuck out, obviously outside of Iowa, when you went on the road as some of the most memorable, maybe most difficult to play in, maybe some interesting stories that kind of come from the other Big Ten venues?
Yeah, I remember walking out in the big house. I don't know if it's changed now. It's been a while since I played, but you kind of walk it out. You walk right in the middle of the stadium. I think it's still there. And as you came out of the tunnel, it seemed like the stands just went. It looked like the top of the press box was in the clouds. It was just insane how. It's a cathedral. It's just huge. Was surprised how quiet it was, to be honest with you. And then Ohio State. I hate to hit the easy ones, but the Horseshoe was rickety, loud. The fans were lunatics. They had looked up, your background and yelled specific things about why you sucked. With the crowd, like that was always something I remember with Ohio State. That was the old Metrodome days when I played there. The Metrodome had its charm as well.
Yeah, I've heard some. I never, even though I've lived here in the Twin Cities for I can't remember how long, maybe 5 or 6 years now. Never set foot in the Metrodome, and some people say I'm lucky. Some people kind of go the other way. But there's all of that. Here's a comment from LFG. Madison is, and I know you're an Iowa guy, Jeff, but I gotta pump my chest of my Wisconsin fanhood right now. There is no better place, and maybe I'm not the person to talk to since I haven't been to a ton of places. I'm no big game boomer here, but for Wisconsin, game day is as good as it gets. Man, it is walking up and down Regent Street. You can go and just walk past any house. They'll give you a beanbag to toss. They'll hand you a beer. They'll say, "How's it going?" And there's great food. State Street, Regent Street. I'll always say, go to a game at Wisconsin. Madison is definitely the place.
Madtown is a blast. The funny story that we tell amongst my buddies, now we're all married with kids and we can't keep this pace anymore, but after I was done in 01, 03, and 05, the same general group of buddies and cousins and one of my brothers, we went to Madison for the Iowa-Wisconsin game each one of those 3 years. First thing I'd like to point out, Iowa won the game in 01, 03, and 05, so that certainly made our trip fun. at some point we tried to piece together the stories from those 3 years, and we can't. They just all blend together for this just amazing, time that we always had in Madtown. I love Madtown. One of a quick one that I have to give you the PG version of is, I think it was 01, and we were pulling into town. We were kind of picturing the tailgate scene being more like Iowa City, which is in people's yards and stuff like that. Not quite the same thing. It's a little bit more bar-based tailgating in Madison, but we found a college house, and this college kid was holding up a sign that said, "Park here or F off." So we said, "Hey, can we park here?" He's like, "Yeah, man." And he charged us $20, but he gave each one of us a free beer, and we were doing the math. I'm like, you're just killing your margins here, kid. But anyways, that's always been a fun story.
I don't know if he was in the Granger School of Business over there in Madison. It sure doesn't sound like it.
Right not.
It sure doesn't sound like it. But yeah, there's great venues. I'd love to make it to Iowa. I'd love to make it Nebraska. That's about a 6-hour drive from here. That's kind of been on my mind as well. Over there, there's a lot of good venues around. Then of course the big ones. Everybody maybe from outside the league talks about the 100. When you talk, I'm a big hiker. They talk about 14ers in terms of mountains. I always talk about the 100Kers when you talk about stadiums. Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State coming on down the road. So Jeff and Jordan going to have their preview cast, as I said, coming out this week. Jeff, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming aboard here. I've been wanted to talk to you, have you on a live show for some time. So I'm excited that we were able to do this. I'm excited that you were able to join me tonight. Big listener to the podcast, folks out there. If you haven't, wherever you get them. If you're not a big podcast person, I wasn't kind of when I originally found your show, and then I started listening to yours. Then I listened to this team's podcast and this team's podcast, and it all kind of gone off from there. So appreciate all the coverage you guys do for the conference each and every single week.
And thank you for the kind words. Thank you for having me on again. It's the Eyes on Big podcast, Apple, Stitcher. You can pretty much find us everywhere. And I'm Jeffery the Greek at Jeffery the Greek. Thanks again for having me on, Ted.
All right. Thanks to Jeff for joining us here tonight on Big Ten Ted Live. So great conversation. We started with football. We ended with tailgating. That's the way we do it. Sometimes it's opposite when you go to a game. You start with tailgating and you end with football. But thanks everybody for joining. It's going to be a great weekend. I've got previews of Iowa, Penn State. I've got what's the other game? Ohio State, Notre Dame. So Ohio State, Notre Dame is going to come out tomorrow. Iowa, Penn State is going to come out the day after that. Thanks to Jeff for joining me here tonight. So it's another great edition of Big Ten Ted Live. Thanks everybody for joining me tonight. So until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted, and we will see you in the next one.